Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading George Lakoff's Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think, talking about the linguistic worldview of both people on the left and the right. This is also our first episode with a live studio audience, maybe, because you came up to visit me here in Kirksville for an award ceremony type deal, and you brought, of course, my mom and my little brother. Now we're in the hotel room recording this, so it'll be an interesting episode.
I'm a little anxious because due to the squeaky chair, I'm sitting on the floor. And, I don't think we should think about what is in the carpet in a hotel floor. But trying not to think of that as I sit on the floor today.
Yeah, Eli just walked into the room, my little brother, and just gave the most devious, smile I think I've ever seen. So he might be making a guest appearance at some point on the podcast here. Hopefully he's not too loud, but we'll see.
Well, he is brilliant, like his brother. So I'm sure he has some very incisive thoughts about the subject.
Well, he'll chime in with no idea what we're talking about and insert something at some point.
Most likely to be a random insult of his brother Jonah, which is totally off topic and irrelevant.
He's not here.
Yes,
he's not even here at all.
It doesn't matter.
He's on the other side of the state right now. But yeah, we're talking about Chapter 2 this time, the worldview problem for American politics. So still more somewhat introduction type stuff before he really gets into the meat of the book in the next section.
I'm wondering when he's actually going to get to the point.
Yes.
But
well, he's a linguist.
He likes to waste time. What is your take on this Chapter 2?
It has been over a week since I read it because I thought we were doing both chapters last week.
We did not.
But I thought this one, I think it sets out his goals a little bit clearer than last time, because this is where he's actually talking about, okay, what are the worldviews for both of them? What are the problems when trying to make a worldview that kind of encompasses everything, which is what he's been talking about for the past 30 pages at this point now, but now he's actually getting into more specifics, and so I think it is a decent setup for what he's talking about. Of course, he's still kind of crazy, but...
Yeah. I initially, the first half of this chapter, I was getting aggravated at the author because how he was phrasing things, describing conservative thought. But then the second half, I realized maybe I should give him a little bit more credit because I think he was overgeneralizing maybe on purpose. Well, maybe give him the benefit of the doubt. But what but of course he starts in this section, which is the worldview problems for American politics, and his initial look at that is puzzles for liberals. So he's talking about how liberals don't understand conservatives, and right out of the box, the first line is, conservatives are fond of suggesting liberals don't understand what they say, that they just don't get it. The conservatives are right, so I'd agree with that. And he says, the conservative victory in 1994, which he's obsessed with, which was a big deal in the 90s. The liberals were really shocked by this. So how could anybody vote for these people? And they won a majority in Congress. And he even talks about how liberals were mystified by, a great many things, or people thought they were. And then he talks about William Bennett, who's not even a factor in modern.
I don't even have any idea who that is.
He was influential, but he was never as influential, in my opinion, as the liberals thought he was, because all he talked about was morality and the Book of Virtues, and I always got the sense that maybe I shouldn't be so critical of him because some of the stuff he says is fine, but I always kind of got the sense he was more of a grifter. He was latching on to this evangelical push, and he published this book and was on a bestseller list. But I didn't really, I just felt it was a little false. It didn't ring to my ears. And the liberals were just up in arms. This guy be popular. He's talking about the Book of Virtues, and how could a conservative be virtuous? And he says, he's trying to explain to the liberal, reader, the main issue for them, which is, he says, why do conservatives think that virtue and morality should be identified with their political agenda? And what view of morality do they profess? Well, that's really the question for everybody's politics, because it's always your moral worldview is going to be reflective of your politics and vice versa, I think. Do you think?
Which I think is something that people I mean, I don't know what people were thinking in the 90s, but I think it's definitely something that people think now. I don't know how many people go around thinking, well, there's nothing moral about my political view. Like, I mean, he seems to frame it like people on the left just don't think about morality and talking about politics. But I mean, of course they do, to some regard.
Well, I think there was a sense in the the 70s and 80s and early 90s from the liberal point of view that they were just being technocratic, that they were just doing what makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you still have that today.
And so you do have that today, but it's so obviously, the left wing is so obviously a religion that it wasn't as obvious at the time because they were complete, they're really trying to be secular. The fights over, getting prayer out of schools, separation of church and state, and all that sort of thing. And they were generally victorious in those battles under the theory, well, we just want to get government out of those things and not replace it with some sort of other ideology. But then once that had been accomplished, then it became obvious that they have their own ideology. And I don't think, I think there were a lot of leftists and liberals at the time that thought they were just being logical. They weren't imposing a moral system, so somebody from my age, I can remember when they were just trying to, they just thought they were talking about math.
Yeah.
But when they were talking about politics, well, of course we do these things. Anyway, so I started getting aggravated when he's talking about, he says, when he talks, the conservative Speaker of the House of Representatives embracing family values suggested that the children of welfare mothers be taken away from their only families that they have ever known and be placed in orphanages. This sounded like a contradiction of family values to liberals, but not to conservatives. Why? I mean, I assume he's talking about Newt Gingrich, who famously was having an affair when his wife was literally dying of cancer. So this and to say that this statement was held up as if it was a statement all conservatives would agree with. They weren't opening up orphanages in the 1990s. If they were actually doing that, I think that's more representative of conservative thought. But he likes to pick out individual statements, that being the author, and paint a broad brush against all conservatives.
Yeah. Which is something that he warns against doing in that last chapter when he's like, well, we have to make sure that we're not taking, I forget the exact terms he used, but the salient exemplar, I think is what he's saying, like one example that we think, stands for everything, something that's memorable. Right. And he does that all throughout here.
Yeah, one after another. And I can go on for
and I'm sure that's his point, I guess, but...
Well, he eventually gets around to, and I don't know if I want to refute all these different things, like where he says... being pro-life, but they don't want to. They do want to prevent the deaths of fetuses whose mothers do want them, though through providing adequate prenatal care programs, meaning the liberals.
Yeah, it's like, why are you opposed to abortion if you don't want to spend a bunch of money on prenatal care programs?
Correct.
Like
and the conservatives have never been against prenatal healthcare programs and have always said, let's spend more money on making sure these babies are born healthy. That has never been a position of any sort of mainstream conservative thought. But I mean, his point is trying to emphasize to the liberal reader, okay, all this stuff is crazy. These conservatives are saying this crazy stuff. Let's try to understand them.
Well, because I think that's his whole point, is because he doesn't believe in any higher thing. Because he thinks... Largely, I think that pretty much everything is an accident, how these moral systems have formed, and we've come up with stuff after this accidental happening of everything coming together. We've come up with metaphors after that to explain them. Right. And there's no meaning really behind it, but we've come up with the meaning after it was already in existence. Yes.
And I'm going to belabor this point a little bit further. He talks about, he says, this is a quote on, page 25. Conservatives are opposed to welfare and to government funds for the needy, but are in favor of government funds going to victims of floods, fires, and earthquakes who are not in need. Why isn't this contradictory? Well, it's obvious why it's not contradictory. If you're funding things that are man-caused disasters that are no fault of anybody, that's a lot different than funding people who may or may not have been the victim of their own decisions. Yeah. There's a completely different cause and effect there, because you can't, no matter how much money you spend on disaster relief, you're not going to encourage more hurricanes. You know, so you're not going to encourage more floods and tornadoes. Now you may, and we've seen this, encourage people to develop in areas that have hurricanes. And I think that's a valid argument, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying, you know, it's the same to spend on disaster relief as it is to spend on welfare programs. Well, if you pay people to not work, they're not going to work. Yeah. And you're going to get more people not working, but you're not going to get more tornadoes. You know, anyway, so he has these false choices. Yeah. And it's really defamatory of conservatives, and it just bothered me going through this. He does
the same thing to liberals, to be fair. He spends about half the words doing the same thing for liberals than he did for conservatives, like 2 pages for all of the, why do conservatives think this, and only a page for, well, you know, why do liberals think this? He's like, how do liberals support welfare and education proposals if they sanction the murder of children by supporting the practice of abortion? Isn't this contradictory? So he's doing the same thing for them, but he seems to be less befuddled by all of the liberal points.
Well, and that's when I started saying, okay, well, maybe he's trying to be fair, but he doesn't say in this book, I'm trying, you know, like when he's talking about conservative points of view, he's not saying, well, you know, liberals view conservatives as saying these things from this perspective. He's saying them as if they're accurate, you know, that they're true. And then when he gets onto the liberals, which is, like you said, you know, much shorter. You know, I don't know. Do you want me to? You probably want me to move on, because he talks about conservatives are willing to increase the budgets for military and for prisons on the grounds that they provide protection, but they want to eliminate regulatory agencies whose job is to protect the public. Completely different type of discretionary spending, where you have military and prisons are the primary goal of government. You don't have a functioning society without those. The funding for regulatory agencies are a modern, relatively recent development in all type of government programs in the history of the world.
Well, what he does is he also, when he's talking about the conservative points, he like brings it to a theoretical, like determined conclusion that he's like positing as fact. And he doesn't do that for any of the liberal points. Like, you know, conservatives claim to favor states' rights over the power of the federal government, yet their proposal for tort reform will invest the federal government with considerable powers previously held by the states. He goes on and on about like why this is a bad thing. He's like trying to refute the conservative point within just describing it. And he doesn't do any of that for the liberals. He just says, this is what liberals think. Conservatives find it weird for this. But he's like going through this theoretical like debate with the conservatives when he's going through their points, which is really weird.
Yeah. And he's talking about the tort reform. But he doesn't mention there's interstate commerce issues with regard to, you know, interstate regulatory actions as opposed to state level torts. But that's a technical thing, the legal side of it. But so he's really, so I was a little worked up in that first half of this chapter because I think he's just defaming the conservative thought. But then he does, you know, get around to saying, but when he describes the liberals, this is my main complaint. Like he says, really in just a couple of paragraphs on page 27, for example, you know, how can liberals claim to be supporters of labor when they support environmental restrictions that limit development and eliminate jobs? He just has it as a question. Yeah, he doesn't say, you know, how can conservatives view funding of a war, you know, the Defense Department of prisons, but they don't support the funding. Yeah,
because he's not saying, like, if he was being fair, if he's treating it the same way as the conservatives, he's like, liberals claim to be in favor of this, but this is the clear outcome of these, you know, economic proposals that is bad. And it's like, because that's what he's saying for the conservatives.
Yeah, the liberals claim to be caring for children because they fund neonatal care, but they support abortions, which is killing the children before they're born. I mean, that would be the equal other side of it. And the complaint. So it's completely obviously biased. Yeah.
Which is so weird because, you know, as someone who's like language frames how we think, you'd think he'd be more careful about how he's using his language and framing everything, but he's not, or he's intentionally
he's just dishonest. Yeah. You know, he's either dishonest. I think he's dishonest with himself. I'm getting the sense that he's just has such a warped view of the world and politics, and he's so convinced that he is right. That he is trying. I honestly think he's honestly trying to be fair in his own mind. Yeah. But he's just. I don't know how bright this guy is either. You know, because how do you not see this? Yeah. It's basic logic.
Well, I mean, speaking from experience, there's not a lot of linguists who are conservative, who actually believe in
I thought you were
conservative
saying very
things.
bright.
Well, I mean, no, I wouldn't say that. There are a lot of smart people, but there's not a lot of people who are actively listening to what the conservative view is. So if he's sending this, hey, conservative, or not conservative friends, linguist people, double check my work, they'll double check his linguistic stuff, but they'll have no experience in what conservatives actually think.
True.
So he has no actual good copy editor, I'm guessing.
Yes. Yeah, true. He should have. Well, if he had a smart conservative friend, he could have submitted to that person.
He probably didn't know anyone who voted for Nixon.
So he does. Okay, so then after that, after I'm already aggravated with him, then he finally gets into some points where I think he's making some good points and headway, and hopefully he'll be making some good points on the main thesis of the book. Otherwise, it's really disappointing as I go through this. Oh God, he's never going to make any good points or be informative. But it does, I think, in its own perverted way, it does help. It's another example, but it does help try for us to understand the liberal mind. Granted, we have so many examples because they're all throughout media and government and entertainment industry.
Yeah, this book is almost like a data point for another book with the same thesis. You know what I mean? Like somebody could use this as data for how liberals view conservatives.
Yeah, so that's correct. That is right. So then he gets onto the unconscious liberal and conservative worldviews, which I'm going to try to ignore that he says that, because if it's unconscious, how are they thinking it? But what he really means is like the premise, the general philosophical underpinnings that are just assumed by each side, which is really what he means, as opposed to unconscious. So that word just bothers me when he uses it in this context, because again, if it's not conscious, then it's asleep. You don't.
It's really it's like an underlying principle, to everything. That's really and that's what a lot of people mean when they're talking about this stuff.
So I'm trying to ignore that, but I'm having a very hard time doing that. So then he talks about adequacy consideration. So you have to basically analyzing these things, you have to take certain things into account that you just can't know or are difficult to know. And the first is worldviews must make the collections of political stands on each side into two natural categories. For example, the liberal worldview analysis must explain why environmentalism, feminism, support for social programs fit together. A conservative worldview analysis must explain why their opposite sides fit together naturally for conservatives. And that's one, how they all fit together. And second, any adequate description of the two worldviews must show why the puzzles for liberals are not puzzles for conservatives, and conversely. But then he talks about the third one, which he says is more demanding, which is the worldviews must additionally explain the topic choice, word choice, and discourse form. So I hope that's what's going to be his
and that's the actual linguistics here, and away from just his political ramblings. Because, those first two are really just him saying, why do they think these things? Why do these fit together? Which, coming from this guy, I'm not sure if I really trust those. But I do think he will hopefully put some good data forward about the different word choices and discourse of the two groups, which I think that'll actually be valuable and
if he ever
good.
Gets there.
Yeah, we got to get through a lot first.
I'm losing hope.
Yeah.
So then he talks about, I think the next thing. He does quote Rush Limbaugh, so I'll give him credit for that, because Limbaugh. I don't remember him saying this, but of course this is the 90s. It's been a long time. So he says, as Rush Limbaugh is fond of saying, words have meanings, plural. It can mean something into somebody else in different contexts, and it may be even to different people in the same context, which I think is a good point. And so he talks about the language of conservatism. And he starts that section off by saying, conservatives like to make fun of liberals, and I have written on the margin, low-hanging fruit, claiming the liberals just don't speak their language. And he says they're right. And I think there's a lot of truth to this, that we kind of talk past each other. Which
and this is still back in the 90s. That's still something to keep pointing out here. It's it's only gotten worse since then. It's been exacerbated.
Yeah, and I honestly think that the liberals have become more dishonest. I think the conservative politicians have become more dishonest, but to their own voters. But that's a whole different thing. So let's see. So he kind of describes some different positions as examples.
He points out, like, example, big government does not just refer to the size of government, the amount spent by it. And again, this is him picking at conservatives. He says, one can see the misunderstanding when liberals try to reason with conservatives by pointing out that increasing the amount spent on the military and prisons increases big government. He says they laugh. The liberals have just used the term. So he's like, well, you're just not understanding what we mean by big government, which I think is true. I think that is a valid point, is that, when you say big government, it might mean something different for different people.
Yeah, and I do think this is shifting, right now significantly with this kind of realignment that's going on the conservative side of it and the Democrat side, where I think people nowadays may consider the military, a lot of the military spending and prison spending, to be part of the big government program. Yeah, like it's not really serving the primary purpose. I mean, if you go back to the primary purpose of prisons is to lock people up. Well, now we have this whole it's almost like the prison industrial complex where you have all these social programs and treatment programs and all this other stuff, which is all well and good, but under the Department of Corrections, which of course they're using the word corrections because they want to correct the behavior and teach people to do different things, but and then the military with the whole social programs and social engineering they're doing now. Which is a big concern. So I think that might be shifting, but I think his point is valid. Is that if you talk like if you say if you use the word equity at a Republican Lincoln Day dinner, you're going to get boos no matter what you're saying. And so I think he's right that there are certain ways to phrase things that are going to ring really hollow, and sometimes you'll get a politician. That misreads the room, and they've been talking at Washington too much, and they come to a local meeting. And it's like, whoa, you're talking. The words you're using, don't. They're buzzwords that are negative to the audience.
Well, you definitely get some of that. When I was in D.C. last summer, like the people who have been on like congressional staff for many years, like they have their own sort of way of talking. Like even people who work for conservative politicians, it's like this is not. If you went to like exactly what you're saying, if you came here to Kirksville, went to the Republican club meeting, you would not be a popular person. Might be saying things that they might agree with, but it's all going to be in that weird sort of DC jargon where it's like really sort of almost corporate sort of buzzwords in a way. It's just not popular. People don't talk like that.
Yeah. Well, I remember Blaine Luetkemeyer, who was a congressman from our area back home. And he came to Rotary. Did I tell you this story before?
I don't think so, no.
So he came to our local Rotary club, and he came with a group of people, which is unusual for us. We don't usually have politicians. We have local politicians. But anyway, he comes in, and it was kind of nice to have a congressman there. He was our program. Cool, so he's going to give us a speech about what's going on in the world. And anyway, so the seating, it was pretty packed house. And so their group kind of had to break up. Anyway, this guy sits at us, and he's a big gentleman. And he's now, last I knew, he was hired as a kind of a make-work job with the Port Authority, the local Port Authority. But he was, at the time, he's sitting there, and we have lunch before the program. So we get to talk, hey, who are you? What do you do? And one of the guys asked him what he's here for. He said, I'm here to see Luetkemeyer speak. And he says, oh, so what do you do for a living? Do you work for the Congress? Oh, no, I don't work for him. And, okay. He says, I work in Jeff City. And so another guy says, what do you do in Jeff City? And he says, I'm a consultant on issues, or some sort of consultant. And I said, oh, you're a lobbyist. And he says, I said, you're a registered lobbyist, because I wanted to make sure he confirmed it, as opposed to denying he's a lobbyist when he's a registered. He said, yeah, I'm a registered. Okay, fine, And that's fine. We don't care, Everybody's got to make a living. And so then Luetkemeyer starts talking. He just talks about a couple different things and this and that. And then the large gentleman at our table feeds a softball question to Luetkemeyer about port funding. It was a kind of a big topic at the time. And so, I've got this funding through the federal blah, 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 blah. And this is when the Republicans had a majority in the House, but not the Senate. Yeah. And so he said, I got funding for the Jefferson County port, blah, 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 blah. And for some reason that rubbed me the wrong way, that this lobbyist was throwing off a softball question. First of all, the lobbyist is a guest, and I don't think guests should be asking questions.
Yeah.
We should be asking questions. You're here in our club, we should be asking questions. You want to be a guest? Sit there and shut up. So that aggravated me, and so he's, and Lincolnmeyer's, talking about how the Democrats are spending this money and deficit spending, and how it's out of control. You have to take back and blah blah blah. So I said, yeah, I got a question, and I said, so you're talking about spending, and it's my understanding that the Constitution says all funding for the entire federal government has to start at the House. So that means if the House doesn't pass the spending bill, then it doesn't get spent. And the Republicans control the House. So why haven't you cut spending at all? Seeing how you're in charge of all federal spending. It doesn't happen without you guys saying, well, we did pass, and there was a budget agreement that had just gotten through that reduced the increase in spending. So it reduced the rate of increased spending. And he says, well, we passed this budget, and it's going to really make a cut in the deficit, and it's cutting spending. And I was against it first because it was drastic cuts, but we got these segregated for the defense. And I said, well, I have a follow-up question. You said you're cutting spending, but aren't you really just reducing the rate of the increase in spending? And I thought I was seeing steam come out of him. He was staring daggers at me. And I mean, I kind of assumed I was on a list. So now that he's retiring, it's probably a good thing if I ever want to get in politics again.
Oh my gosh.
Because he was visibly pissed off.
Really?
He was really pissed. He says, well, that's just not true. We're doing our best to cut spending. He's almost like yelling at me. And so I said, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Like one of these smart ass, like response to it. And so at the end of the meeting, I talked to a couple of guys. I said, I said, yeah, I probably shouldn't ask those tough questions of the Congress. He said, no, that was great. We were thinking the same thing. Yeah. But it was that type of thing where he's talking about BS and he's using this Washington speak crap, and it went over like a lead balloon. Yeah. And I think that makes this author's point, because he was talking about sequestration of funding and all this other baloney, and we all knew he was lying to us. And he never did come back to our Rotary meeting. Yeah,
I mean, I think that is, I don't know, it depends on what you're going to in DC, but I think that is shifting a little bit. When I was up there, I'm forgetting. American Moment is the name of the organization I'm thinking of, and their goal is to like get a bunch of conservative like policy staffers like to be in the next White House administration. Like that is their express goal, and they had like speakers every week, every Friday, and some of them were definitely that sort of we're doing this blah 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 blah, but a lot of them are like policy workers and like people who are writing stuff, but some of them were very direct, especially when it comes to more moral issues and stuff like that. It's just like, we're not gonna like beat around the bush here. We have problems, which is refreshing, because you go to a lot of this stuff out in DC and a lot of the stuff, the people in your office, it's just like this real weird talking around everything. But I do think maybe there's some people up there who aren't as bad about that, but it's definitely a thing. Yeah,
it was funny that the Lincolnmeyer had a local radio show program on our local AM radio show. He'd call in. I don't know if it was weekly, but it was a regular thing, and I'd listen to him over the last few months before he announced he's retiring, not running for re-election. And he was most animated over the years over the last several months over Matt Gaetz. Because of the whole vote to get McCarthy out. Yeah. He'd talk about those. I forget the words he was using, but for Lincolnmeyer, it was very strong words. He clearly hated Matt Gaetz for upending, the established order. And quite frankly, I think that's why he's not running for re-election, because and he said it was spend more time with his grandkids and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I'm sure a lot of the motivation was kind of chaotic up there, and in my opinion, like the gravy train is ending. It's not easy, They can't just keep passing stuff, and I think it is chaotic, and that kind of neoconservative back scratching politicians, their days are numbered, and they know it. You see them retirement after retirement. They're just like, they're fed up because there's these firebrands. I'm not a huge fan of Matt Gaetz, but it was weird because Lincolnmeyer had never been that negative towards any Democrat. Yeah. And they would do all sorts of crazy stuff. But whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but I think the author, back to the book, the author had a point, is that if you use certain language, it's going to sound hollow to either a liberal audience or a conservative audience.
And he does mention, here's some words and phrases used over and over in conservative discourse. Character, virtue, discipline, tough it out, get tough, tough love, strong, self-reliance, individual responsibility. And he goes on and on. Just, I think that's a fair point, that those are terms that you will see more often from conservatives than you will from liberals, which I think is an interesting thing to look into. Well,
but I think he's missing I suspect as we get through this, the theme I'm going to be talking about is him missing the philosophical grounding of those, because I think he's right in the sense that conservatives view government differently than liberals, and he talks about this strong father versus nurturing mother, but it really is just about the rule of government. Yeah. Is the government supposed to be taking care of me? Or is the government supposed to be doing what's necessary and then getting out of my way?
And that's a big problem with linguistics overall, is you completely remove any sort of philosophical underpinning. Because they're all nominalists. Everything's just a word that we've come up with, or everything's a construct sort of idea.
Yes.
And so it's very hard to talk about, because you'll never hear, from a linguist, what is the purpose of language beyond, we communicate with each other in it. And that's kind of what they say. It's like, where does language...
Isn't that missing the point of the study of linguistics?
I would say so.
Isn't that the point of studying linguistics?
I say so, yes.
How could they... What's the point of even studying it? If you're not trying to find the purpose behind the language and the communication of it.
Yeah. I mean, so generally what linguists now think is it's like the descriptive versus prescriptive deal. I think that's where really where this comes from, where you're only supposed to describe language. You're not supposed to say, like, what is proper language. And that's the whole thing that, linguists always say is you can only describe it, you can't prescribe it. And so that's kind of led into...
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Who other than a linguistic would teach you how to use the language properly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it's stupid. But what they're saying is like they pick like, people in everyday speech, they use prepositions at the end of the sentences. So technically there's no rule that you can't use a preposition at the end of the sentence. But they're missing the point. In more formal writing, we do try to avoid that. We view that as more formal.
Yes.
But essentially what they say is everything is very situation based, right? There can't really be any specific rules that we can prescribe to people if everything's based on the context in which you're in, is really what they're saying.
So what is there to study?
How it's used differently. That's where you get all of the...
But who gives a rat's ass?
Nobody. I don't care.
I mean, literally, who cares about that field of study if all that field of study is to tell us what we already know, which is what it is?
Yeah, and that's a big problem because there's so many people going into like the applied linguistics branch, which some of it is good because that's about like how you teach languages.
Well,
and things like
that I get.
That's good.
Yes.
But the other part of applied linguistics is how it's used in society, how we use language, and they're just saying, well, in these contexts, you're supposed to use, or you're not supposed to use. People use these things, and
but we already know that we do that because we do it.
Yes.
So why do we need a
well, it's unconscious.
Well, then so what? I mean, then fine. Then it's unconscious. But why do we have to articulate it?
I mean, you don't. I mean, it's a lot of people who have tenure. I think is really what it is.
I'm befuddled by this. It seems completely irrelevant.
And that's why I took that sociolinguistics course with my third semester here because I was like, okay, well, how language affects society. This is going to be great. This is going to be really interesting. It's just like, well, actually, it's racist if you use these words. And that's when you can be prescriptive. You're not supposed to say this because it's racist for some reason. They're fine with that sort of prescriptivism. But it's all like, this... Because it's all about power now. It's the power dynamics between speakers. That's how they frame everything. It's like you're going to use different language depending on if the person you're speaking to has like a higher, power status compared to you. And that's really what they base a lot of their theories around, is it's this very much like almost class divide type speak where it's like, well, you can't, talk to your employer because, they have more power over you and everything's just dependent on your status. And of course, white people inherently have more power, is a big through running, point in everything. Or if you're male, you have more power, and everything's based on status. And we use language to discriminate because of that.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a complete waste of time.
Yes, it is.
To even study it in that manner.
Yes, but taken correctly, taken in the pre-1960s approach of what is the purpose of language? Why do we have language? Where does it come from? What can we do with language? What do languages do differently from other languages? A lot of that has disappeared because now it's so much society-based, and that's like the big wave of academia is how is power encoded in our language and how do we use it in different contexts? And it's bizarre.
I think it would be relevant if you were to study, okay, let's say the power dynamic, how to use the power dynamic or how to thwart the power dynamic. I guess that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking is really interesting is with these AI programs. Your speaker at your Phi Beta Kappa. Congratulations on that honor. Talk about IA, or AI. I'm sorry, it might as well be IA. Intelligence artificial. Anyway, but they've converted Hitler's speeches to English, and it's fascinating because. You know, when you hear, like, I've heard, audio of Hitler's speeches or videos with audio, and he sounds like a lunatic German, because for me, I don't know the German language. It just sounds like it's a very harsh language sounding, and he's screaming and blah, 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 blah. But when they've converted to English, it makes more sense to me why some people listened to him and followed him, because it was really eye-opening, and I think that is a fascinating topic, and to how he used language to manipulate people, and that I think makes a lot of sense to study that. Yeah. But I think it has to be in the just to say that we're not this power dynamic thing writ small between individuals just seems like it's so destructive and counterproductive to communication.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you'll change all that.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, it only takes one.
Yeah, maybe. Well, have I told you?
Everybody follows the one. You got to be. Somebody has to be the first.
Yeah. Well,
somebody has to be a leader.
Did I ever tell you about the Steven Pinker thing with the Linguistic Society of America? I might have told this story before. But I had a professor last semester. I was taking a course on like teaching English as a second language. And one of the assigned readings was from this guy named Steven Pinker, who I think is also like a cognitive linguist, studying how the mind processes language. The professor said something really weird. He's like, yeah, maybe we need to start phasing out Steven Pinker stuff because he's kind of become like a problematic, person. That's their favorite word to use.
That's the code for you to actually study that person.
Yes, and I did. and I looked him up. I'm like, okay, what did he say? And evidently there was a petition to get him removed formally, like as a member of the Linguistic Society of America, like the big overarching.
Is he still alive now?
Yeah, he's still around. Okay, he's not too old, 60s maybe.
Oh, okay.
So he's not like an old guy. This is recently. This is like a few years ago. And I was like, I looked at the petitions, like, his harmful rhetoric, blah, 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 blah. I was like, okay, what is he talking about? This was back in 2020, 2021, something like that. He was talking about police brutality. And he's saying, well, if you look at the statistics, it's really, I think I have told you this story. It's really not about...
I'm familiar with it. But
okay, it's really not about race. It's just that there's too much police brutality happening. So it's not even an extreme, right-wing crazy position. He's just like, we need to do police reform because there's brutality against both white and black people.
Yes.
And they went crazy.
Yeah.
They went crazy against him. He's not even like a conservative guy.
Yes,
that's not even a conservative opinion. This guy's crazy. He's taking race out of the equation. He's minimizing the truths of these people, whatever language that they use. We need to get him kicked out. Luckily, I don't think the petition actually got him removed.
Yeah.
They had some amount of backbone in Linguistic Society of America to say, well, we can't kick him out because of that. That's nonsense. But there was a lot of people. One of the professors here did. I saw her name on the petition.
We need to start a petition to have her removed.
Yeah, well,
I wouldn't want her to be removed, but I think we ought to scare something into her.
Well, she's retired now, so it doesn't really do much.
We missed our opportunity.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just things like that. It's like if you even remotely, like outside of the weird sort of accepted left-leaning worldview, and I think that's really telling of where this guy's coming from.
Why would you want to have an academic removed? I don't know. But that's the whole. That's the whole othering of thought that is a big problem today, and maybe this author can provide us some guidance as to why you shouldn't do that, although in the context of
actually doing
conservative thought. Yeah. But the liberals are crazy now. Anyway, so where was I? I completely lost my...
Yeah, we were talking about, he's like, here's some words, and he does the same for liberals, the social forces, social responsibility.
Well, I do want to say this. He does say, as he's mentioned, but right before that, the last paragraph in 31 before the goals section, as I mentioned above, conservative and liberalism are not monolithic. So he recognizes that, there are deviations from the norm in both of them. And he says, I believe central models and variations of those models exist, so I want to give him some credit for recognizing that there's, a perspective of thought on each side as he goes through this. So, when he talks about the goals, he says which is true. But it's funny, it's a deep revelation. What I have found is that conservatives have a deeper insight into their worldview than liberals have into theirs. and I'm like, well, that's true. And he says, while liberals did not talk about these things until conservatives started winning elections by doing so, which is talking about morality,
centrality of morality in the family. Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to that, because they didn't want to talk about morality, because they didn't believe in morality being part of public life. Yeah. And that, because they wanted to pull, like I said, they wanted to pull that morality out of government, but people want to have a moral leader. They want to have their values followed, and they were getting creamed by some of these elections. And then he says, liberals are less aware of the implicit view of morality in the family that organizes their own political beliefs, which I think is true. I think
it's absolutely true.
It's still true today, because they don't think that they have a moral system or a religious system, because they don't go to church, but they have an underlying, moral precepts. Because if you say, well, can you have a racist friend? Well, no, I couldn't do that.
That's immoral.
Could you do this or do that? And they have this repulsion. They're repelled by certain things, but they don't think that's a moral belief or a religious belief. And it's exactly what it is. It's okay, they have those beliefs, but you should understand that you have a religion. It's not where you have religious beliefs. You're just not a member of a religion, I guess. Is what the point is.
Exactly. And it's like that's the clearest way, I think, to get them to realize that is with abortion. Where they're like, well, you shouldn't have your morality into these things. And I think the best response to that is, well, give me a non-moral reason for why murder should be illegal. Yeah. And it's like, because it's all based on morality, right? And it's all of our laws at some capacity are based on some moral principle to some effect. I mean, you have speed limits, but
that's the over-criminalization of society, which is a big problem I have. And what was I just heard a quote? Did I say this last week?
I don't know.
Maybe I used it on my radio program.
Oh, there you go.
The more law, this is, I think, from Cicero. The more laws that exist, the less justice. Because you cannot go through life without violating a criminal statute nowadays. Yeah. Especially since all traffic laws, especially in the state of Missouri, are criminal, can be criminal. If you're 1 mile per hour over, you're committing a state law violation. How many times do you drive 1 mile per hour over the speed limit?
A decent amount.
If you drive too slow, below the speed limit, you've created an ordinance violation. If you roll through a stop sign, I mean, you can think of all these myriad. So, and that's just traffic. You think of all the regulatory stuff, and that's for employment practices which are being criminalized. It's really kind of scary because that's partly how they're getting Trump. Is they have all these regulatory laws that they're really getting him. Like the trial he's on now is for bookkeeping. I mean, the New York case is because it wasn't for payoffs of Stormy Daniels' lawyer. It wasn't for paying his lawyer to pay off Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about this affair. It wasn't for any of that. It was because his corporate entity it designated it as a retainer fee and not for paying off her to keep quiet. That's what the charge is.
It's ridiculous.
And they've multiplied it by however many entries there were. So I think there's 4 for each payment, and I think there were 8 payments maybe. So there's 32 counts. That's literally what the charges are. And so if you're in any sort of business in New York, you have to know now, but even if you didn't before, everything you do, including how your accountants keep your books, is a criminal law violation for you. And that's really spooky. And that's how they're able to get us.
It's also, a problem with so much of everything being regulatory that they think that everything is regulatory. So when you get into like actual moral issues, it's just the same as them to speed limits. And things like that. So it's like, well, of course we want to, not let these people, express their opinions because it's, infringing on me, but that's just a regulatory thing. Of course, it's just common sense. There's no morality behind that. It's just, that's a regulatory thing the government should do because their opinions are harmful. That's their whole idea.
There's a regulation against hate speech. So, when you say, shut up, gay person. You can't say that.
Yeah.
Who are you calling gay? I'm non-binary. What? Well, there's a regulation against hate speech, so now you're going to jail. And that's what they're doing in England, and it's coming here. But anyway,
back to the book.
So
we're talking about the goals.
Yes, what are the goals? Oh yeah, we must find a way to talk about alternative moral systems and how they give rise to alternative forms of politics. I think that's the goal, and I think it's well stated.
Yes.
And I think it's a good goal. And then he says, journalists, including the most intelligent and insightful of journalists, have been at a loss.
Really?
Yes. Well, considering that the most insightful and intelligent journalists are borderline retarded. You're not supposed to use that term, but it is descriptive. Anyway, and he says, honest journalists need help. We need help finding a job as a journalist because no honest journalists are employed currently.
Yes.
Anyway.
Did you see, this is another tangent. Maybe we should keep moving.
Yeah, you're doing more tangents than I am. Congratulations.
The NPR journalist who was fired for bringing up the claim that there was like liberal bias at NPR.
I would like to correct the record. He was merely suspended and then he resigned.
No,
he was not fired.
Well, suspended and then resigned.
How long do you think it is before that CEO is let go?
I don't know. That's a good question. But there's a great Babylon Bee headline about that was like, surprising revelation that NPR at one point in time had a journalist on staff. There you go.
And that guy, I think, is of the left.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for
but
sure.
He's like, I think we should be...
Wait, he works at NPR.
We should be maybe somewhat accurate when we describe these things, even if there's conservatives involved. They're like, you're suspended.
Yes.
Enough. We've heard enough out of you.
But then he moves on to the basic claim, to go back to this. That's where he's actually talking about what are the models? What is the things that he found?
He has a good summary, I think, of the conservative. Even he calls it the strict father model. Do you want to read that, or do we not want to? He talks. Well, the model posits a traditional nuclear family with the father having primary responsibility for supporting and protecting a family, as well as the authority to set overall policy, et cetera, et cetera. And then he goes on to self-discipline, self-reliance, and respect for legitimate authority are the crucial things that children must learn. And I think that's last sentence, I think, is pretty accurate for a conservative family. And that's where my point is about that Easter egg hunt example. Yeah. It's like a conservative parent is going to say, if you're not going to do it yourself, I don't care how much you cry, you're going to learn this lesson. You're either going to do it for yourself or it's not going to get done.
Yeah. And that's what he says here at the end. He says, once children are mature, they are on their own and must depend on their acquired self-discipline to survive. Their self-reliance gives them authority over their own destinies, and parents are not to meddle in their lives. So I think that's one of the big things is like, we should have, structures in place, for the quote-unquote children, that safety net sort of idea.
Yes.
But then beyond that, it's your decisions, your choices that are what are going to determine your life. The government is not going to determine your life for you.
I think he gives a fair summary of that point of view. And then he also, I think, gives a very fair summary of the opposing side, the liberal point of view, where he says the obedience of children comes out of their this is the view of the liberal parent. The obedience of their children comes out of their love and respect for their parents and their community, not a fear of punishment. And I'm, as a parent, I mean, I know that is the view of left-wing parents because I've seen it through the chaos that philosophy creates for the children and for the family. And he says, if their authority is to be legitimate, parents must explain why their decisions serve the cause of protection and nurturance. And you see this all the time. And this is a great summary of it because you see this in grocery stores when the kid's throwing a fit and the mother or the father is saying, well, little Johnny, if you don't settle down, we're not going to be able to make it to the candy store to get you or the ice cream store. And they're trying to explain to a 4-year-old why they have to stop having a complete mental breakdown in the middle of the store instead of just saying, all right, we're leaving, we're going home, or just cry all you want. We have to check out,
because it's always, they always explain what will happen if they don't obey, but then they never follow through with it.
That's the other problem. Because their philosophy is the discipline comes from almost like a mutual agreement.
And that's what he says.
They think it's a contract law where the children need to learn most is empathy for others. That is not true for a child. But anyway, he does a great job of explaining that philosophy, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
his
extending
summary,
that to the government, I think, is spot on. Well, the government just needs to encourage us to work with one another, and we just need to rely on the government, and they'll help us. He says, love, empathy, and nurturance are primary, and then only after that do children become responsible, self-disciplined, and self-reliant through being cared for, respected, and caring for others.
Yeah, isn't that is such a good summary. And he says, did you just read this? When children are respected, nurtured, and communicated, is that what you were just reading?
I was reading like the first sentence.
So, yeah, and when children are, I'm going to say it again. Yeah, when children are respected, nurtured, and communicated with from birth, they gradually enter into a lifetime relationship of mutual respect, communication, and caring with their parents. That's a great summary of bad parenting. It just doesn't work that way, especially when they're younger. And if you're going to have that philosophy, you're going to have nothing but problems with those kids. And I didn't really understand this until we had kids, because I thought, well, you don't want to just say it's my way or the highway. But you know what? That's what the kids want to hear. They want to know there's just a rule.
Yeah.
And it's set not only set in concrete, it's in granite, and the rule will never change because they need that consistency. Yeah. And sometimes you have to say, well, the thing that we never wanted to say to our kids when we were young parents, because I said so. But that's sometimes what you have to say to a child in order for them to understand there's certain things you can't do and certain things you must do. It's because I said so. And then as they get closer to adulthood, then you have those communications and those discussions and the agreement and the nurturing and all that kind of stuff. But the foundation is not mutual assent. It's not. This is not a contractual relationship where you're equals. Yeah. You're not an equal to a child. The child is a child. Yeah. But anyway, but he gives a great summary, and again, like you said, that is their political philosophy. And I think that is really effective argument that he's making about that.
What he says on the next page, kind of discussing that, I'm towards the bottom of 35, he says, talking about the nurturant model, moral authority in the nurturance model functions as a consequence of nurturance.
Yes.
Moral guidelines defined by empathy and nurturance. Similarly, in the strict father model, empathy and nurturance are present and important, but they never override authority and moral strength.
Yes.
And I think that's spot on, that the liberals think that morality can only happen after we have everything sort of guaranteed by the government. Yes. Once we have everything, once everything's equal and perfect, then we can be fully moral people. And then we can make this fully moral system. Conservatives say, well, no, we need the morality first to even have any of those things.
And I think the money quote is the next line where he's talking about conservatives. Indeed, authority and strength are seen as expressions of nurturance. And that is true of conservatives, because they think that authority and strength are nurturing to a child. That's what I was just saying. And so like my Easter egg example is, the mother is, I'll do it for you. I'm going to nurture you. No, that's the worst thing to do, because you're sending the wrong signal.
Yeah.
So the liberals want the government to be this nurturing, and I don't know, in some respects, I think that he has a right on as far as the parenting styles of liberals versus conservatives writ large. Obviously there's deviations. But I don't know that the liberals have to have the same view of government that they do in the family. And I know some liberals that don't have that same left-wing view of the family because they know what works with their own kids. Like they have a whole different view of family, what that goes on in their family, especially if they're small business owners. They'll want to. Liberals are some of the worst as far as like funding healthcare plans for their own employees, because it's coming out of their own pocket. Yeah. But they expect the government to be the nurturing provider of all those things for all people, including them and their employees. So I think there's an overlap in that attitude, but it's not exactly one for one. I don't think. Yeah. I think there's conservative parents. They don't think they're conservatives, but they teach their children the life lessons. But then their political philosophy is this nurturing parent model for the government. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But then he ends with this last section. It's kind of things we've already talked about. But But just to bring things back, the hidden versus overt. He says, you can't really ask someone why they think something because everything's, unconscious, and they won't give you like an actual answer.
Except for when they do, but go ahead.
Yes, but that's what he's saying, is everything's unconscious, which we talked about. And then he also talks about exactly what we were mentioning earlier, the descriptive versus prescriptive. He says, the models we were discussing are descriptive, not prescriptive. They are attempts to describe what people's actual unconscious worldviews are, not what they should be. So that idea of, well, I'm just an objective observer here. I'm not saying what's better or what's worse, but of course, as we know, he is. And he is very much prescribing one by beating the other kind of down at every chance that he gets.
Yes, we're gonna have to remember that quote to see if he even tries to hold true to that.
Yes.
Where he's going to try to say he's not interested in what morality should be.
Yes,
because I think that's exactly what he's going to try to do throughout the rest of the book.
Absolutely. He says he's saving it for the end. But I don't know about that.
I have 2 chapters that are biased.
Yes.
The rest are pure as the rivers of snow.
All right. Do you have any other thoughts on this chapter?
I don't know. Do we want to open up the floor to our audience?
Yeah, I don't know. I was surprised. They were surprisingly quiet. I said we had a live studio audience, and they didn't say anything this whole time.
Well, your mother is an expert at ignoring me and anything I say. So I don't know that she knew I was here. She is smiling, thank goodness.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. And your brother is staring at us,
he
trying to think
confused,
of something clever, but he is at a loss.
Because he's had his earbuds in the whole time. He doesn't know what we've been saying.
He's got nothing going on between those earbuds.
Do you have any comments to add, Eli? He's just loudly chewing a Mike and Ike is what he's doing.
This is your opportunity to be on the podcast,
yes,
Eli.
You're
what do you have to say? We can hear you.
You can come over.
Say something about there are a few Republican linguists.
What did you say?
Linguists in general.
I don't know what he just said.
He said you mentioned that there are a few Republican linguists.
Yes.
But there are a few linguists in general. So what is I think to draw it out, he's saying that your comment is irrelevant because it's so few to begin with. What's the relevance that there are a few Republicans? Correct?
Fair. That's a good point. That's a good point.
And the answer to that is it's still important within a smaller set because it's relevant.
Yes. You'd think it would be about 50-50 because it's about what the
even if there's only 20 of them in the world, you expect 10 and 10 as opposed to 10.
19 and 1. I think it's even few. I think fewer than 5% of linguists are actually conservative.
I don't know. You're the only linguist I know, so we're betting 1,000 in conservative linguists in my worldview.
Mom, what about you? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I found it interesting when your father was discussing parenting. And
maybe you should come closer. It sounds like a long, drawn-out thought.
No, it's not a long, drawn-out thing.
She's going to claim credit.
Speak it to the mic.
I just found it interesting with all his parenting advice that he did not credit where he learned all his information about parenting and that I am the expert in that field, and you did learn a lot from me.
I will concede that 100%, but not everything. But certainly, like one of the things that I thought she was crazy for was when we brought Sam home. I mean, he was basically a baby infant.
The day we brought him home.
And she said we have to start reading him books. I'm like, are you crazy? And how do we even do that? And so we started all of you reading these board books where we're just reading stories to you all. And I thought that was, at first it was insane, but as he was a little baby and he knew very quickly to turn pages, like he'd reach out and turn pages as a little baby infant before there's any language. And that I think is a key reason why all of you are doing so well.
Yeah.
Intellectually and academically.
There is language before you hear it.
What's that?
I said there is language before you hear it. You just don't know it's developing and happening because they need to hear us speak the language and read the stories.
There is language before you hear it?
Well, before, like his knowledge of language, it's like we always measure and we look for those first words.
Yes.
But we got to look, the receptive language develops much earlier than the expressive language.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's happening in there. You just don't see it.
So,
that is true.
So you're not saying there's language before you hear it.
He was developing language before he could
express it.
As in you, before you heard him express it.
Yes.
He's hearing it.
Yes.
You hearing it. He's hearing it before you're hearing it from him.
I agree.
Yes. There you go. We cleared that up.
No, I think 100%.
No, absolutely. The input's important.
And I learned a lot about childhood development from your mother, who has a degree in early childhood education. She doesn't hear me praise her very often. I'm getting a little nervous by praising her now, because I think she thinks I'm lying. She doesn't think I'm being accurate about it. No, very good. But I think, well, and she's. We had kind of an unusual dynamic in that we're both very strict. I think a lot of parents, a lot of relationships, you have one that's a softie and one that's very strict. And if anything, sometimes I was the softie. Yeah. Especially when you guys were really young. Yeah. No, I don't disagree with anything she said.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and the language development. I wonder if that's how you really got interested in it. Very, very early, because she's always been fascinating, very, very smart about language development. Yeah. Academic side of it, and just with you all, and I'm sure you would have seen how we handled Jonah and Eli when they were babies, because you were old enough to see what we were doing with them and developing their language and talking about it. Like when they were babble talking, I think there's something to that.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So she's really the true linguist in our family.
Oh, is she? Are you going to go back to school for that degree too?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, we should probably wind this episode down. It is past 9:30 now at this point.
Oh, my gosh. Past my bedtime.
To pick up.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, that's right.
Do you have any other final thoughts for this episode? Well, this has been Season 8, Episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And that was Rebecca Bishop and Eli Bishop as well in the background.
First time we had guests on the program.
No, we've had guests. We had Dr. Austin Freeman.
Well, I meant live guests in the studio.
In the Holiday Inn. Yeah.
You're just giving away my location.
Yeah. When this goes up tomorrow,
I will be long gone. I'll be out of town.
There you go.